Tales from the Trenches. Stories forged in the fires of experience. For more resources, make sure to visit escogroup.org. All right, everyone, thank you for joining us. We're hanging out with the Eugene Silberstein. Eugene, hello.
Thanks, Cliff. Good to be with you.
So one of the things we want to talk about in Tales from the Trenches is maybe it's not always your fault. Maybe we need to step back and re-examine an entire situation to be able to look for faults that may be other than our own. So Eugene, you've got some fantastic stories to share in this topic.
Well, having been in the industry for 43 years, if we don't have at least a few tales from the trenches, I think we're definitely remiss in what we're doing.
Exactly.
But yeah, when we're talking about things that might not be your fault, a few situations and scenarios just pop into my head as vivid memories of this industry. I mean, like I said, having been in the industry for over 40 years, you can imagine how many service calls we've been on, how many projects, how many installations. And to have a few, like literally three, hop into your head as these are the top three.
Oh.
And there was one scenario, and it drove us crazy for literally years and years and years. And we had a rooftop package unit, and it was a 10-ton rooftop, and it had two 5-ton circuits.
Yep.
Right? Two 5-ton compressors, completely different circuits. And the system was installed, and it had two stages. Obviously, stage one, would run one circuit, and stage two, the second circuit, would come in. And we could never get the system to operate on single stage. And this was many, many years ago. I was still younger in my career. And what would happen was, when the thermostat was calling for first stage cooling, the first stage compressor would turn on, and the system would pump down and turn off on low pressure.
So restriction maybe.
Yeah. And it wouldn't start. So now we're like, well, what's going on with this? Why are we cutting off on low pressure? But when the space temperature rose and second stage cooling kicked in, then both stages ran and cooled perfectly.
Oh, really? So not a restriction.
Yeah. So if it was cooling perfectly, then there was definitely no restriction in the line. So we're trying to figure out why we're cutting off on low pressure. Well, it works on second stage cooling, but not first stage. Has to be an electrical problem.
Right.
So
Pump down solenoid or something.
Yeah. So the senior tech on the job went through all the wiring and reran all thermostat wiring, replaced the thermostat. We grasping at straws, doing a lot of things. And this literally went on for quite some time. And the unit never ran on single stage. And again, when you think about a system not running on single stage and going off on a low pressure control, people are automatically thinking down one specific path.
Very myopic.
Yeah, very myopic view. And what did we do wrong? This was the word on the street. Like, what did we at the company do wrong? Did we wire something wrong? Did we put in a thermostat that wasn't compatible? We didn't do any evacuation, piping, charging. It was
because it ran fine once it was up on second. Yeah.
And then everything was perfect once we got to second stage. And it was kind of the assumption that, well, you know what? Maybe this is how this system is going to operate, because we've done everything we could do. And
no one can find it.
Until the stage one compressor failed. So the stage one compressor failed and had to be replaced. So our team goes out to recover refrigerant from the first stage loop.
Yep, circuit one.
And yeah, and each of those circuits held 6 or 7 pounds of refrigerant. I don't know exactly what the number was. So let's say 7 pounds for argument.
Sounds right.
And the technician is recovering refrigerant from that circuit and pulls 14 pounds of refrigerant out of that
Wait
circuit.
a minute.
Hold it. So each circuit is supposed to hold about 7 pounds, and yet we successfully pulled 14 pounds of refrigerant out of that circuit. And then the light bulb went on. So we actually had members of the team go out and trace out the refrigerant
plumbing.
at this, trace
piping.
out the refrigerant circuit on the system. And there were 2 pipes that were crisscrossed at the factory.
Wait a minute.
So the reason the unit was pumping down on first stage was because the second stage compressor wasn't running, but that second stage compressor was in the circuit. So picture refrigerant making a figure 8 through 2 complete loops. So instead of going through one compressor, one condenser, one metering device, one evaporator back to that compressor, we were actually going from compressor 1 to condenser 1 to metering device 2 to evaporator 2, and the refrigerant was actually making a figure 8. And like I said, this was going on for years. People on the team were going and running new thermostat wire, going through the factory wiring.
Yep.
But nobody thought, because it was a control issue. Everybody thought it was a control issue because when we hit stage 2, everything worked fine. So it was a really, really interesting learning experience.
It's kind of an eye opener for
Yeah,
where does the refrigerant flow?
Yeah. And like you said, it's not always your fault, but I think sometimes we just need to take a step back and realize that things that happen are not always, I wouldn't say our fault, but you know what? Had we started checking line temps, we would have realized that.
Right.
Hindsight is always 20/20, Clifton, because say, oh, if we would have done this, we would have seen that right away.
Yeah.
But it took the compressor failure and the refrigerant recovery to actually open our eyes and say, wow, you know what? There's definitely something going on with that. Hey, you know what? Being that we're talking about piping issues at the factory, I was involved with a project. I wasn't the installer, I wasn't the service person, but I was a willing observer. I was actually going to be the occupant of the space that this system was to service.
Right.
And it was an air-cooled chiller. And I was a faculty member at this institution, so I'm not facility, so I can't touch anything.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Union issues.
Yeah.
And so I was there to teach. I wasn't there to mess with equipment. And we had an air-cooled chiller installed for the building. And brand new building, brand new chiller got installed. And this was back in 2009. And the chiller was being installed with R407C. So they did a whole
22 replacement retrofit.
Yeah. And it actually went in 407C brand new.
Oh, really?
And so we made that decision with 407C from the start, but did an analysis and determined we're going to go 407C. So anyway, so the chiller gets installed and starting it up, and the startup technician could not get the chiller to function correctly. And right away, his company was like, oh, well, did you charge the system correctly?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, we don't think so. We need you to recover all the refrigerant from the system, evacuate, and charge it again. And now we're going to send over other technicians to make certain that it's charged correctly. And they could not get the system to function. They actually had a chemical analysis done of the refrigerant because the company was saying that the technician caused the 407C to fractionate and something was happening with the refrigerant. And they did this 3 times. They had analyzed the refrigerant. The refrigerant was fine. They recovered, they evacuated, they recharged, they recovered, evacuated, recharged, and could not get the system to function. Now, here
So
I
couldn't
am.
get it to capacity, couldn't get it to
Yeah,
run, or
yeah. It would not cool. What happened is the operating pressures were so high, the head pressure was running excessively high, and the subcooling in the condenser was excessively low,
Mhm.
and the low side pressures were high as a result. And superheating the evaporators was fine. And it just did not sit right in my brain because high head pressure is an indication of a system overcharge,
Right,
and low subcooling is an indication of a system undercharge.
right.
And when you get that disconnect, just like if you get low suction pressure, well, that's an indication of an undercharge, and low evaporator superheat, that's an indication of an overcharge. That's an indication that there's an airflow problem.
Airflow,
Same
right.
thing on the high side.
Yeah.
So we had high head pressure indicating an overcharge and low subcooling indicating an undercharge, which in my brain
Hmm.
points toward an airflow problem, not necessarily a refrigerant problem.
Okay, sure.
So I wasn't really supposed to, but I had my students
Analyze.
visually check
Yeah.
through the condenser coil to see if there was a
Track this
blockage,
down.
check the motors, check the rotation of the motors, check the blades, check the pitch, everything was correct. We measured airflow. We have airflow through the condenser coil. And so high head pressure, low subcooling, pointing toward an airflow problem, but we have airflow. So what is the other possibility? Well, the other possibility is that the condenser coil is not sized properly.
Sure.
So, well, the condenser coil is the condenser coil. It's installed on this air-cooled chiller.
Right. Should be matched with the airflow.
So, yeah. So I actually had my students, again, we weren't supposed to do this, but we did, trace out the refrigerant flow path through the condenser coils.
Mm-hmm.
And they marked both ends of the coils, and it was a W configured coil. And what the students found was that 3 out of every 4 of the tubes in the condenser went nowhere. They circled back onto themselves. And
Re-looped.
it made a loop that didn't go anywhere. So 3 out of 4
Oops.
tubes. Yeah, so the condenser was basically 75% smaller
Yeah, absolutely.
than what the capacity of what the system was sized for.
Right.
So, and now the challenge was, how do I tell people what the problem is without telling them, because I wasn't supposed
Right.
to do anything.
I wasn't here, but there's a problem here.
Yeah. So it was really, really neat. And ultimately the condenser coils were changed out and the
Right.
system worked fine. So those two, really popped into, into my mind
Yeah.
about, the mispiping. But what's really, really funny, Clifton, is being that we're talking about things that might not necessarily be our fault.
Yeah.
I was on a job. We were installing a commercial system at a drugstore in Manhattan, and the equipment was on a roof setback, and we were doing the install, and we were actually piping down a chase. So we're actually in harnesses, and we're being lowered into the
To the
chase,
cavity. Yeah.
and we're doing the refrigerant piping.
Yep.
And it was a remote condensing unit, so we're running the suction line and the liquid line. And it got to the point we finished piping, we leak checked, and everything was fine, and we went to
Mm-hmm.
evacuate the system.
Sure.
And we were nearing the end of the day, and the refrigerant line runs were pretty lengthy. And at the end of the day, we put the system on a vacuum pump, and we left. Okay, and
Yep.
this is
Let it run
back in
overnight. Sure.
yeah, this is back in 1989, 1990. So
Yep.
going way back, and we let the vacuum pump run overnight. We got in the morning to check our vacuum, and we were confident because we pressurized
Sure.
and we held a
Hold pressure.
pressure test. Yeah, and our gauges were reading about 10 inches of mercury. We
Okay.
didn't use micron gauges back in 1989.
Right.
And So we're like, wow, hold it, we're not holding a vacuum. So we were able to pressurize the system, and we held. And we call the office and we tell our service manager, listen, the system's not pulling down into a vacuum. We only have 10 inches.
Right.
Well, you have to have a leak. You got to look for the leak.
Somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So we checked everything we could find. And he's like, listen, the store is open. They're still getting the store ready to open.
Right. But we're under a schedule.
Setting the shelves. They're stocking the shelves. People are there till, all day getting the store ready. And we spent the full day checking all the solder connections, the solder joints, and couldn't find anything. We're tightening up flare connections. We're just tightening,
Searching for
and
anything.
yeah. And at the end of the day, we said, all right, well, we'll see what we got. And once again, we turned the vacuum pump on. We left for the night, came back in the next morning, and we were at 10 inches of mercury.
Really?
And Clifton, this literally went on for almost a week. We were looking for this leak.
Where's this leak? It's got to be here.
Yeah, we actually had to go back down into the chase and cut the suction line insulation off the lines, and we're literally leak checking
every joint.
We're going down in harnesses. We're being lowered down. It was a major
lot of work
taking, and it was getting really, really frustrating. We could not pull this. We were holding a
system pressure, test pressure.
Yeah. And we just could not get the system to pull into a vacuum. So we changed vacuum pumps. We got brand new vacuum pumps, changed the oil. We did whatever we could do. And we're in the mechanical equipment room, and we're beating our heads against the wall, almost literally.
Yeah.
Because we were told, you cannot leave this job until you find this leak. And it was about 8 o'clock at night. We were still working. And we were in the mechanical equipment room. And then somebody from the drugstore walks in, and they said, oh, you guys are still here? I'm like, yeah, we're here. We're still working. We have to take care of something. And they said, oh, well, we're shutting down. And they go to the circuit breaker panel, and they start shutting all of the circuit breakers off. And all of a sudden, they hit a breaker,
vacuum pump,
and my vacuum pump turns on. So what happened was they were leaving at night, turning everything off, and then they were coming back at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning.
Before you get there.
Back on. And we got there at 8 o'clock in the morning. Our vacuum pump is still running. Air quotes.
Right. It's been on all night. It was running when I left, and it's running when I get here.
And we looked at each other, and we just threw our hands up in the air. And so moral of the story is, now if you intend to leave a vacuum pump on overnight, at least mark a circuit breaker. Like, do not
turn me off.
Yeah, it was actually really, really crazy. But it's so funny. Like I said, 43 years in this industry.
Yeah.
And those 3 instances, when you said, oh, we want to record some tales from the trenches.
Yeah.
And immediately these 3 just popped into my head. And it's like, had we done things just a little bit differently, had we looked at things just a little bit different
perspective,
step back.
Yep.
Yeah, we don't always have control over things, but these kind of things only happen one time. Once something like that happens with a vacuum pump, I mean, we were blaming the vacuum pump. We were blaming the vacuum pump oil. It was actually really crazy. And then it was just that light bulb when that gentleman came in and started turning the circuit breakers off. It's actually pretty interesting.
That is. I love that. That's a perfect example of why we do Tales from the Trenches. After the first couple of these, I started thinking, I should have actually named this Do As I Say, Not As I Did. Eugene Silberstein, we are so grateful for your giving back to the industry and everything that you represent and do for us. So thank you so much, Eugene.
My pleasure.